What's up, guys? So I know that I said in this next video that I was more than likely going to do either the water pump on the Veloster or the rear wheel bearings on the Audi, but I went and bought new tires for the Veloster because I want to do a lot more work to the Audi, so I want to actually stop driving it for a little bit. So I want to go ahead and get the Veloster to where I can drive it every day, and in order to do that, I needed to replace the tires. I need to get an alignment on it. I need to replace the brakes. So I put new tires on it, went to go get an alignment because I just didn't feel like doing it with the string. And they told me that my front wheel bearing's bad. I hadn't checked it, so I didn't know. But front wheel bearing's bad, so I'm going to show how to replace the front wheel bearings on 2012 Hyundai Veloster. Shouldn't matter if it's a nav or a turbo. Should be the same for both styles. So hope y'all enjoy. All right, so the first thing we're gonna have to do, break loose all the lug bolts, break loose the CV axle nut. I'm gonna go ahead and break it loose on both sides of the car because I'm replacing both bearings. Okay, so all I'm doing here is I remove the center cap out of the wheel. Just use a flathead screwdriver, pry it out. Then I've got a 32 millimeter socket and a cheater bar, and I should be able to break it loose. Now these nuts that are on the CV axles are supposed to be one-time use nuts, and they're typically tighter than that, but I've had the front end apart on this. So, get both of these broke loose. Alright, both of those are broke loose. So now I'm going to take the wheels off. I don't know what the factory wheel lug nut size is because mine have aftermarket tuner lugs on it. So once I get the wheel off there and get the car jacked up, I'll pick back up. Alright, now that I have the wheel removed, I've got the jack underneath it. I've got a jack stand underneath here. I'm only going to do one side at a time because I'm on dirt and I don't want to take a chance of the car falling because I am going to be pulling on this hub with a slide hammer. So I'm going to go ahead and take these two Phillips head screws out of the rotor. I'm going to take the caliper mounting bracket and caliper off and take the rotor off. And I'm going to remove the nut for the CV axle, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do after that. Now sometimes those screws won't want to come out of the rotor, and you'll need one of these little impact drivers. It's got a little Phillips head bit that goes in the front, and you just stick it in there and hit the back of it with a hammer, and it'll rotate and shock the bolt out. I had to use it on one of those bolts. So now I'm going to remove the caliper, but before I remove the caliper, because I'm going to remove it with the mounting bracket, it's still attached to it, so I'm going to compress the caliper a little bit before I take it off. Now you can do this multiple ways. One way is to pry it through one of these openings. Yeah, I'd need a shorter screwdriver. Or you can use a C-clamp or a big pair of vice grips or channel locks like I've got, and squeeze the caliper in. And this is just to make it easier to put the brakes back on. Okay, now I've got a little like 1/16 of an inch gap because these brakes are in relatively good shape. I can't remember how many miles are on here, but I replaced them not too long ago. But it sounds like the back ones need to be replaced. I'll find out when I start tearing this apart. But need to remove the two carrier bolts. They're 17 millimeter, and they come in from the back. So break both of those bolts loose and take them all the way out, and then the whole caliper and the carrier and everything will come off. Don't lose the washer. All right, and then what I like to do is just hook the caliper up onto the strut. That way it won't go anywhere. We can pull the rotor off. And now we're ready to start. Well, now I can take the nut off for the CV axle, which I mean I could have done before I took the brakes off. Probably should have, but these nuts they've been off of this car before, so I would probably advise to take that nut all the way off before you get as far as I am. I would say take that nut all the way off once you get the car up in the air, because that way if it's still too tight, you can have somebody hold the brake pedal while you remove it. But we're gonna, and these are supposed to be, like I said, these are supposed to be one-time use nuts. I'm not buying new nuts. I'm gonna put these back on. I'm just gonna torque the shit out of them. So, yeah, anyway. So now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna break loose the lower ball joint. Actually, no. I'm gonna break loose the top up here to be able to take the CV axle out. So I'm gonna take the two bolts out of the top of the spindle. Yeah, because that's pressed in and I don't want to damage the boot. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this apart and let the spindle drop down so that I can get the CV axle out. Once I get the CV axle out, I'm actually gonna temporarily put it back into the strut and use that as a brace, because I'm going to mount a slide hammer on here and knock this thing off with a slide hammer. All right, now that I've got that separated, I'm going to finish driving the CV nut out, or the CV axle out. So I've just got my chisel turned around backwards. That way I don't damage the threads. It'd be better if I had a drift punch. Oh, I forgot to disconnect the stupid ABS wheel speed sensor. So let me disconnect that real quick. Hopefully I didn't damage it. I totally freaking forgot about it. So don't forget about the ABS speed sensor. You're going to need to remove it. It's one 10 millimeter bolt. And then it picks up out of the spindle housing. Now the CV axle should just slide out of here. It's going to make me a liar, but it should just slide out. There we go. So now I'm just going to wiggle the CV axle out of the way. And I'm going to put this back together. Actually, I'm probably going to put the CV axle to the inside. Nope. Has to go to the outside. All right. And now I'm just going to slide these back in for temporary, just so it doesn't move too much while I'm using the slide hammer, because I'm going to be yanking like hell on this thing with the slide hammer. So put that one back in. And this one. All right, there we go. All right, that's not too tight, but we're gonna go ahead and pull the CV axle off now. So I'm gonna go get my slide hammer, set it up, and yank that hub off. So now I'm gonna use my cheap ass Harbor Freight slide hammer. Came with this adapter. Slide it right on there, put your lug bolts back on there to hold it on. Or your lug nuts, sorry, thinking of the Audi. But run your lug nuts down to capture it. And then screw your slide hammer into it and yank for your freaking life. Because it's held on there with a pretty fair amount of pressure. So now, oh, where's my, there's the ratchet. All right, there we go. So now that's bolted in. Now I'm going to take my handy dandy slide hammer and screw it in. Big thing about this, make sure you don't smash your hands here at the end. But now you just swing for the fences. All right, so as I was using the slide hammer to take off the hub, I broke my little attachment that was on my slide hammer, but I've welded that thing to a CV axle before. I've used it a bunch, so I'm not surprised that it broke. I'm getting ready to run to Harbor Freight and see what see how much a press is versus buying another slide hammer attachment. If the press isn't much more expensive, then I'm probably going to go ahead and buy a press. I'm going to remove the entire spindle and press the bearing in and out instead of using my bearing puller and all that. I'll still show you guys the bearing removal tool so that you can do it with a slide hammer and a bearing removal tool if I go that route. But if a press is cheap enough, I'm probably just going to buy a press because it's so much easier. But like I said, I'll still show you how to do it the other way. All right, guys, so I'm out here burning the midnight oil. I went and got me a press. I got the hub off. Now I got to remove this snap ring. There's a snap ring right here. So you got to remove, and this is the back side of the hub. Now, usually when you pull these hubs off, this bearing race is stuck on here. So what you got to do is you got to cut it and break a piece of it off, and then it'll slide off. Or you can get a bearing splitter, but I don't have a bearing splitter, so I just cut the race and break a piece of it off and then slide it off. Now I can press this into the new hub. So I've got the new bearing in the hub. So the bearing presses out from the top and comes out of the bottom, and then it presses in from the bottom in. And now I need to support the center race of the bearing. So I have to put something on the inside circle of metal right here to support it, and then set it underneath the press and then press the hub on. What's up, everybody? So it's the next morning. I'm gonna get a little bit better detail on this driver's side. I got distracted, well, not distracted, but I got slowed down dramatically by having to go to get the press. I was gonna go get another slide hammer. The slide hammer, I cannot buy just the attachment for the slide hammer from Harbor Freight. I'm sure I can order it off the internet, but at the store, I can't buy just the attachment that I broke. I would have to buy a whole nother slide hammer. And there's nothing wrong with my slide hammer. It's just that one attachment that broke. So I went there and looked and saw the slide hammer's $100. The little 12-ton press that they had was $150, so I went ahead and bought the 12-ton press. Now, you can still continue to do it with the slide hammer like I had. That's the way I normally do them. Now that I didn't have a press, because I had a press and I sold it when I went to buy my house, and now I've got this one again, so I'll just start using the press to do wheel bearings. But I've done wheel bearings with the slide hammer and my bearing removal tool for years. I didn't have a press for a long time, and then I got one, but then I sold it so that I could have the money for the down payment for my house. So but the rear wheel bearings on the Audi, I have to do with a slide hammer, so I'm gonna have to find that replacement piece so that I can pull the hubs off the rear of the Audi. It's the only way I know to do it on the rear of the Audi. I mean, there's other ways to do it, but it's the only way I've ever done it myself on the Audi is with a slide hammer. So on this one, I'm gonna show a little bit better detail on the driver's side because it got a little too dark. I tried to film, it looked like shit. So I'm actually not even gonna include any of that in the video. I'll just show the good detail on the driver's side. So I'm gonna skip to where I was on the passenger side as far as having the CV axle removed, the wheel removed, and all that shit. And I'll pick up when I'm disconnecting the spindle from the tie rod end and the lower ball joint. Okay, I'm gonna preface this part of the video with saying, come up with your own rigging. I'm not responsible for you getting hurt for doing any of this because my setup is extremely freaking risky. But I'm gonna show you how I did it because I did the other wheel bearing like this and it worked perfect. So, and I'll videotape it while I do it so you can see how it works. But this is my sketchy ass setup. So I had to bend the dust shield because you cannot remove the dust shield unless you remove the hub. So I bent the dust shield down, got a jack stand holding that side, jack stand and a plate so that I could spread it across those two flats for the brake caliper. So now I'm gonna put a socket right here to press on the socket to push it through, and it'll knock just the hub off. Okay, so now I have the old bearing out. Here's my other old bearing from the other wheel. And then there's the hub. The bearing presses out from where the hub is. So you got to press the hub off from the back, and then you got to press the bearing out from the front after you remove that snap ring. So, and like I was saying in my previous video, or in the previous section of the video, you have to cut this race to get it off of here. So that race is right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my angle grinder and I'm gonna cut a really sharp angle because it's the only way you can get in close enough to cut up here to the front. You can see how I did it on this one. It's a really aggressive angle so that you can cut through all that meat back here. So once you get cut through far enough, you can take a chisel and hit it and it'll break, and then the rest of it will slide off. So this is the result after I did it. So I did a really aggressive cut, a really aggressive angle, I guess I should say, so that I can get my blade in there close enough without hitting the heads of these bolts. Now you can see I barely scrubbed the front of that one, but I cut all the way down, but not all the way through. Now I did hit the hub a very minor amount right there and a very minor amount right here. But I didn't, I mean, it's a surface scratch. It looks deeper than it is on camera. Or it's not as deep as it looks on camera, I guess is the best way to say that. Because it's just a surface scratch. But you cut through, don't cut all the way through, but you cut 90% of the way through. And then you take a chisel and hit straight down. So you would angle the chisel in straight this way and hit hard, and it'll crack the bearing race. And then you can knock it off. That's how I did both of these. So you just put your chisel in straight into the bearing and hit it in, and it'll crack it. And then you can pull it off. Now I can press the new bearing into the bearing housing, and then I'll press the hub into the bearing after I get the snap ring back in. So I went ahead and flattened the dust shield back out because I'm not gonna need to press on that arm anymore. So now I need to set it up I'm going to be pressing on the face of this thing, so I'm going to put one of my blocks under there to get a flat surface to press against. And then I have this is the bearing press kit that I was going to use for removing the bearing while the spindle was still on the car. I'm still using that kit as my press fittings for doing it on the hydraulic press. So let me re-angle my camera. There we go. Trying not to catch anybody if they come out the door. But, all right, so that's basically how I'm gonna press it in. I'm probably gonna have to lower the ram, but here's my new bearing. And generally, I will check it against the original bearing, make sure the thicknesses are the same, make sure the inner diameter is the same, and all that good stuff. But I already checked the other one, so there's no reason to do it again. So I am going to have to lower this ram. All right. And we set the bearing in there, and now we need to make sure that we're pressing on the outside edge of the bearing and not the inside edge of the bearing. Because there's no pressure on the inside of the bearing race, you'll actually bust the bearing apart if you're pressing on just the center. So you need to have something that's pressing on just the outside edge of this thing. And I've got all these little plates, which I dropped one of them when the thing blew apart. Where did it go? I don't know, I'll find it. But anyway, there it is. I think it's this one. Yeah, that's it. So I'll flip it to where this part's in the center to keep it centered up while I'm pressing on the bearing. That way it doesn't slide around and start pressing on the inside. So now that I've got that ready, I just need to line up my center and press it on in. So I'm probably gonna have to freaking raise this goddamn thing up again. It'll barely fit, but it'll fit. Oh, come on. All right, there's one. There's two. All right. So I got it pretty centered. So now I'm gonna press the bearing in. All right, now I'm all the way down. I got a pretty good bit of resistance on the ram. I don't want to force it, so I'm going to check it. Generally, you can feel on a hydraulic press when you're bottoming out. Yep, I'm seated all the way in. All right. So now I just got to set the snap ring in there. All right, so the snap ring's back in there. The way that I put them back in, because these things are an absolute pain in the ass to do, the way I get it out is sticking a screwdriver down inside of this little slot right here, because my snap ring pliers are not big enough. If you have big enough snap ring pliers, you can pull it out of there pretty easy, but my snap ring pliers aren't big enough. So put a flathead screwdriver in there, push down while you're twisting back and forth until you can get it all the way seated, and then pry in and get another screwdriver underneath there to pry up on it and twist while you're pulling it out. and then just work your way around it. And then to put it in, I just start one edge of it, and then I take this chisel and knock it down all the way around until I get it to seat. Okay, so now I have the bottom supported with a ring around the hub center to support it, so I'm not pressing on the lug bolts, because you'll press the lug bolts out. So you need to have something pressing on the center of it. And then in the center, I'm only pressing on the center race. I'm not pressing on the outside race. And that's because I'm forcing just the center part of it onto the hub. So I'm squeezing those two pieces together in the center. All right, so now I've got the hub and the assembly all the way back together. Dust shield's freaking straightened back out, so now I'm gonna go take it and put it back on the car. All right, so I'm pretty sure I forgot to mention the bolt for, if you do it the way that I'm doing it, as far as using a press, the bolt for the lower ball joint is the nut is a 19 millimeter. The nut for the tie rod end has a cotter pin through it. You have to pull a cotter pin, and then it's a 17 millimeter. You do have to have a separator for the tie rod end and the ball joint. Well, not for the tie rod end. Tie rod end, you can just smack it and it'll come out. The ball joint, you're gonna have to have a separator because they're on there pretty good. But put the lower ball joint back into the spindle knuckle, then hook up your CV axle, then hook up your tie rod end, then hook up the top strut, and then bolt in your ABS wheel sensor and put your brakes back on. All right, everyone, so that's going to cover how to replace the wheel bearings on first generation Veloster. I've got it all back together, back on the ground, so now I'm going to take it and go get an alignment done on it. But if this video helped you out in any way, like always, please like, comment, share, subscribe, let your friends see what I'm doing. And should be doing rear wheel bearings on the Audi, and then I'm hoping to be able to do some turbo work to that car. So I'm going to start doing a little bit more modifying on that car than I already have. So hopefully you'll tune in for that. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. See you in the next video. Have a great one.